The wind whistled low across the dry plains of Arizona Territory, carrying with it the scent of dust, cedar, and something else, a loneliness that seemed to have settled deep in the bones of one man. His name was Eli Mercer, a rancher who lived far from town, closer to the coyotes than to any soul who called him friend. Folks in Clearwater whispered about him, said he'd turned down every woman who'd ever shown a spark of interest. Pretty widows brought pies to his porch. Hopeful spinsters tried to start conversations at church socials. But Eli always met them with the same quiet nod, a polite word, and the steady closing of a door that no one had entered for years. Some said he was heartbroken. Others claimed he simply didn't believe in love. Truth was, he'd once had a woman who died giving birth to a child that didn't survive either. Since that day, he'd built his fences high and his heart higher, content to talk only to his horses and the cattle that grazed on his land. One late autumn evening, a storm rolled in from the south, dark and sharp as a knife. Eli was out checking the herd when he spotted movement near the fence, a figure bent low, fighting the wind. When he got closer, he saw it wasn't a drifter or a thief, but a woman wrapped in a torn blanket, clutching a small boy who couldn't have been older than 5. Her hair was long and black, braided and streaked with dust. Her eyes, fierce yet frightened, looked at him like she was ready to defend her child with her life. "We mean no harm," she said in a voice that trembled between pride and exhaustion. "We just need shelter." To morning, Eli hesitated. He could tell by her dress and the way she spoke that she was Apache, a widow, perhaps from the reservation a few miles north. He'd heard stories of settlers turning away native women, especially those who came alone. But something in her eyes, the fire and fear mixed together, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. Without another word, he nodded toward the barn. "Get in. There's hay and it's dry," he said, his tone rough but not unkind. Through the night, the storm raged. The wind howled, rain slammed against the roof, and thunder cracked open the silence. Eli sat by the fire inside his cabin, staring into the flames, thinking of the woman and her boy in his barn. When morning came, he brought them food, bread, milk, and a blanket. The boy hid behind his mother's skirt, peering up at Eli with wide eyes. "What's your name?" Eli asked softly. "Her name's Naya," the woman answered for the boy, her chin lifting in quiet defiance. "And mine's Taza." She looked at Eli squarely, as if measuring the kind of man he was. Over the next few days, the rain didn't stop. The river swelled, the roads turned to mud, and they couldn't leave even if they wanted to. Eli kept to himself, but he couldn't help noticing how Taza moved, strong, graceful, unbroken despite the hardship that followed her. She helped in the barn, mended a fence, even cooked a meal for him and the boy. He hadn't tasted food made by another's hands in years. The boy laughed softly as he played with Eli's old hound dog. And for a moment, Eli felt the cabin come alive again. But the peace didn't last long. That night, when the storm broke, a group of drunken men from town rode up to Eli's property. They'd seen smoke from his chimney and heard rumors about an Apache woman staying on his land. "Mercer!" one of them shouted. "You got a red woman in there?" "That's against the law in Clearwater." Eli stepped out onto his porch, calm but firm. "You boys ride home," he said evenly. "Ain't no law that says a man can't offer shelter." The men laughed cruelly, their eyes burning with prejudice and pride. "We'll see what the sheriff says," one sneered before spitting on the ground. Taza stood behind the door, watching as Eli faced them alone. When the riders finally left, she walked out into the moonlight and looked him in the eyes. "You didn't have to defend me," she said quietly. "No," Eli replied, meeting her gaze. "But I wanted to." That was the first night Eli didn't feel alone. But neither of them knew. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside their hearts was only beginning. Days turned into weeks. The land dried again, the cattle roamed free, and the woman and her boy stayed on, helping with chores and cooking meals. Eli never said they could stay, but he never asked them to leave either. The silence between them grew comfortable, like the space between two trees that shared the same soil but never crossed roots. At night, Taza would hum an old Apache lullaby to her son, and Eli would listen from the next room, staring at the ceiling, and wondering why that sound made his chest ache in a way he thought he'd forgotten. One evening, as the sun sank into the desert, Taza walked out to the corral where Eli was fixing a post. Her shadow fell across the dust. "You've been kind," she said. "But kindness is a debt I can't keep owing." Eli looked up, confused. "Ain't no debt," he said simply. "You needed shelter. That's all." She stepped closer, her eyes steady, voice soft but strong. "And what do you need, Eli Mercer? A wife, or just shelter?" The question hit him like a bullet, quiet, direct, and deadly honest. For a long moment he couldn't speak. He saw in her eyes everything he'd been avoiding. The loneliness, the longing, the fear of losing again. "I ain't looking for a wife," he said finally, his tone rough, guarded. "Then stop looking at me like you already found one," she replied, turning away, her braid catching the last light of dusk. That night Eli couldn't sleep. He thought about the courage it took for a woman like her to speak those words, the pain she must have carried, and the strange, steady strength she brought into his world. Before dawn, he saddled his horse and rode into town. When he came back, he had supplies: a new blanket, some shoes for the boy, and something else. He found Taza at the fence, her hands resting on the rail as she watched the sunrise. "You could stay," he said quietly. "Not because you owe me, not because I need a wife, but because I don't want this place to go back to being empty." Taza didn't answer right away. She looked at her son, then back at Eli. The desert wind lifted her hair, and the sun lit her face like gold. "A home is more than a roof," she said softly. "If we stay, it's because this place feels like one." Eli nodded, and for the first time in years, he smiled, not the kind that fades quick, but the kind that stays. By spring, the ranch had changed. The laughter of a child filled the mornings. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and Eli's heart, long buried under dust and sorrow, began to live again. Folks in Clearwater still whispered, but Eli didn't care. He'd turned down every woman before. But when one asked him the right question, not about love, not about duty, but about truth, he finally found his answer. And from that day on, he never spent another night alone.